What are the different closing methods? Hi, I'm Jonathan Otero. I'm the owner of J&J Management Group and We Buy Houses Seminole. A few weeks ago, I posted a video on this YouTube channel called Closing the Deal with Your Title Company. And in that video, I interviewed my title closer on a lot of different things when it came to closing on a property. But one of them was the different methods that you can use to close. And a lot of people just know of the traditional all cash or conventional loan way of closing, but there's a couple of different creative ways that an investor can close as well. So I want to explore those today in this video as well. So let's get started with the number one way, just so we can get it out of the way and push that off. The number one way that a person can close on a real estate transaction, whether it be for your personal or an investment property, is the traditional way with either all cash or a bank loan. And we know that that's the pretty much the traditional way of closing on any real estate transaction. The problem when you're a real estate investor, if you're going to be getting a bank loan, if you don't have all cash to close, it's much harder for you to get a bank loan to close on an investment property. And the simple reason is, if you already have a loan for your primary residence, the bank is going to be a little bit more concerned about issuing you another loan for an investment property, because if you're not living there and you somehow, let's say, God forbid, you lose your job or you lose the way that you have to generate income, chances are that you're probably going to default on your real estate loan first than you are on your primary residence. And they know that. So they make you jump through tremendous hoops to get a real estate loan for an investment property. So, but however, that's the traditional way, either cash or a bank loan. Sometimes it can be very difficult if you don't have all cash. But that's the one way, and that's the first way, the traditional way of closing. Let's get a little bit more creative though, and you saw this on the video with the title company, something called a back-to-back closing. You may have known that, you may not know that, but a back-to-back closing is usually geared if you have a big profit deal. So big profit deals. We did a deal back in the beginning of June that was yielding us some huge profits. And I personally didn't want everybody knowing how much I was making. So in order to do that, I had to do what's called a back-to-back closing, in where we did two separate transactions. I closed with the sellers of the property in transaction A, and then I took that property and sold it to the new buyers in transaction B. Now I had to pay two sets of closing costs, so it was more money out of my pocket. But because there was so much of a profit to be made, and I wanted to keep some of that information private because I'm the investor and no one should know what I'm making, I was able to do a back-to-back closing. You can set that up with your title company as well, but generally speaking, a back-to-back close is geared towards your big profit deals. So if you know that you're going to be making $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 on a deal, and you have a buyer lined up already and you want to just basically offload that property, back-to-back closings is probably going to be the way for you. The next creative way to do a closing is an assignment. And in this particular way of closing, the buyer takes over your contract. So say, for example, you have a deal under contract and you don't know what you want to do with it. You don't know if you're going to just wholesale it to someone else. You don't know if you're going to take the project on, but you have a buyer lined up. You can simply assign your contract to another investor buyer or to another end buyer. Generally speaking though, when you're doing that, it has to be an all cash transaction when you're doing an assignment. So keep that in mind, because banks, if they're loaning on an FHA loan or a conventional loan, generally don't like to see assignment deals. So it's usually geared for an all cash deal where you have a buyer already lined up and you can basically assign your contract to that new buyer for a fee. And at the closing table on the HUD, you will get a fee for your assignment. Whatever that fee is, you as the investor can designate that fee. Generally speaking, if you're assigning it to another investor buyer, that investor wants to have some meat on the bone or some juice in the deal. So if you're assigning your contract for $50,000, you're probably squeezing all the juice out of that deal, and that investor buyer is going to say, hey, you know what? I don't know if this is necessarily a good deal for me. So an assignment is usually geared for some of those deals that are a little bit skinny and you're just going to make a little quick, $1,000, $2,000 and get out. But that's another way that you can close on a property, by assigning your contract. The next way is what's called an interest release. And that is where the buyer is getting a loan. And so what we're doing on a property we currently have under contract right now, we have the property. The deal is a little bit skinny, but the end buyer ends up getting a loan. And so what we're doing is at the closing, we're just going to release our interest in that property, and we're going to have the new buyer sign the deal with the seller. So basically, I'm cutting myself out of the middle and I'm releasing my interest for a fee. In this particular case, the seller is going to know what I'm going to be making on the deal, because the loan is going to be a conventional loan from the buyer, and they want to see the HUD statement. They want to know what's going on in this transaction, and everything has to be out and open. So I'm going to be releasing my interest. The buyer is going to be signing the deal with the seller, and I'll release my interest at the closing table for a fee. And in this particular case, like I said, the seller's going to know what I'm making on the deal, but that's fine, because everybody knows everybody knew when we got into this transaction on both sides what the deal was. So interest release is another good way and a creative way that an investor can close on a deal by simply just selling their interest in the property. So interest release is another key. And then the last way is subject to deal. Now, a lot of confusion around subject to. What is subject to? How does that work? If you look at line 503 in any HUD statement, you can Google a HUD statement, or in your state or in the state of Florida, which I'm more familiar with, just Google HUD statement in Florida. And if you look at line item 503, it says existing loans taken subject to. Now, the federal government puts that in there because it's a legal thing. A lot of people say, well, what is subject to? Is that legal? Is it legal? Illegal? It is totally legal. As a matter of fact, that's why I point you to the HUD statement, so you can see even the federal government puts a line item in there. And basically what that means is you're taking over the existing loan subject to the existing mortgage that's on that property. And so what you're doing is you're going to be on deed. You're going to be on the deed of the property. It's going to be transferring over to you as the investor, but the loan stays in place. So the deed transfers, but the loan stays in place in the name of the old owner of the property. And you're now responsible for making payments subject to that existing loan. So it's very important, though, when you're doing a subject to deal, that you let the seller know that their name is staying on the loan. Now, the reason why this becomes a little bit tricky sometimes to certain investors is if you default on that loan, or if anyone, let's say, for example, calls the loan company and says, hey, the ownership has changed, or the loan company checks the records and sees that there's been a change on title, they can use their what's called due on sale clause and call the loan due right then and there. And you as the investor, since you're on title, will have to pay for that mortgage right there on the spot, and have to pay for the total mortgage that's due. So if there's $200,000 of a loan or of a mortgage, a lien on the property, and they call that sale due, you now have to pay $200,000 on it. So it's a risk for the investor. Now, in my career, and you can see the video with closing with the title company, the closer that I used in her career, we've never seen the due on sale clause activated. So you have to, as an investor, weigh out the risks. Is it worth it for me to just take over a property and just continue to make payments on that loan, and run the risk of having the due on sale clause be used and having to pay that whole mortgage and that lien right then and there, versus taking over the property and just paying it off and weighing my risk that that's not going to happen? As the investor, you have to weigh the pros and the cons for you and see if that works out for you. There's been properties that we've taken over subject to, and it worked out great. And like I said, I've never seen it. Any other investors that I speak to, no one has ever seen that happen. So it's very rare, if at all. I'm sure it's had to happen somewhere down the line. I just never seen it. But if you're going to take over a property subject to, it's important to let the seller know that their name is going to stay on the loan. You now, as the investor, are going to be making payments onto that loan, and you're going to take over that property subject to. And at the end of the transaction, when you fix it up and you now go sell it for a profit, now that buyer their loan has to be paid off at that point. So that way the transaction can be complete. So, or actually the seller's mortgage has to be paid off at the transaction when you go to sell it, after you fixed it up and rehab the project. It's a great way to take over a property because it's very little to no money down out of your pocket. If you're not giving any money down to the seller, and you're just basically taking over their payments, they're happy because maybe they just lost their job or whatever the situation is and they can't make that mortgage payment. So instead of going to foreclosure, they now have somebody taking care of their payments, and now you can fix it up, flip it. You got into the property for a lot less than normally because you don't have to spend all that money and that capital up front. And then once you rehab, you take all that money that you would have spent up front and now rehab the property, and now you can go sell it for a profit. It's a win-win for both sides. So subject to is a great way to take down a deal, but again, you have to, as an investor, weigh the pros and the cons on that. So hopefully this made sense. Let me go over them again. Obviously, we know the traditional way of closing. You can do a back-to-back close. Again, this is usually held for your big profit deals. You can do an assignment. Again, that has to be an all-cash transaction as well. And this is where a new buyer is taking over your contract, usually an investor buyer. You can do an interest release. That is where you lined up a buyer before the closing, but that new buyer is getting a loan. And remember, the seller is going to know what you're making on this particular deal. But you can release your interest in that and make money on that, on a closing that way. And the last way is subject to, where you'll be on deed and you're taking over the existing loan subject to those existing mortgages and liens that are on that property. You are now responsible for that subject to the existing loans. And then that way you can get into a property for fairly cheap. Take that money that you would have spent for a down payment and invest it into the renovations. Fix it up, flip it, sell it, and everybody wins on that transaction as well. So hopefully this video helped you out, dig down a little bit deeper on what are these creative ways to invest into real estate. Hopefully you guys have done some of these, and if you haven't, this helps you out. If you have a property that is for sale, that you're looking to sell to a real estate investor because they need some work or because there's an extenuating circumstance and you can't use a real estate agent the traditional way of selling, you can't get an all-cash deal, you can't get a bank loan, give us a call. Our number is 407-796-8557. Our website is WeBuyHousesSeminole.org. The number is right now at the bottom of your screen. If you have that situation, give us a call. I'm a real estate investor local in Orlando. I work Orlando, Seminole County. We'd love to help you out as well. So give us a call, guys. And remember, real estate can be very, very, very complicated. Sometimes you just have to break it down. And like my slogan is, everyone knows, let's keep it simple. So real estate, let's keep it simple. WeBuyHousesSeminole.org. Give us a call. Take care. Enjoy your real estate investing.